some really troubling information now about further holes in the Secret Service's narrative of what happened in the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. New text messages who have been obtained by the New York Times reveal that local police were tracking the gunman some 1.5 hours ahead of the attempted assassination. Let's put this up there on the screen. So you can actually see through a variety of these text message screenshots, say, quote, you have this one gentleman at 4:26 p.m. He says, someone followed our lead and snuck in, parked by our cars, just so you know. I'm letting you know because you see me go out with my rifle, put it in my car, so he knows you guys are up there. He's sitting to the direct right on a picnic table about 50 yards from the exit. Roger that, 2 people respond. Then at 5:38 p.m., 2 photos of the gunman are sent by one of these individuals. He continues, kid learning about around building we are in. AGR, I believe, is. I did see him with a rangefinder looking towards stage, FYI. If you want to notify SS snipers to look out. I lost sight of him. Also a bike with a backpack sitting next to it in the rear of the building that was not seen earlier. Call into command and have a uniform check it out. So they were following this young man for basically the entire time ahead. All of his movements, 5:10 p.m. The young man no longer at the picnic table. He's right below the counter snipers. Counter sniper takes photos of him, sends it to law enforcement for the and then according to the after action report, they see that all of these text messages, which were from these local police, are shared in the group chat amongst the officers. They need to inform the Secret Service. They're giving him a heads up. Then by 6:11 p.m., that's shortly after the shots are fired and the gunman is killed by the Secret Service counter snipers. But they see how in the hours ahead of the assassination, that they were identified, that the gunman was identified both by the local police, that he was, that they not only were tracking that he had a rangefinder, that he knew exactly where the gunman or the counter snipers were, that they were sending heads up. And then it highlights the communications breakdown that we talked about yesterday, a decades-long communication failure between local police and Secret Service that gets out into the open. What we really see here is that the Secret Service attempt to throw the local cops under the bus, I think is shameful now with the revelation of this. They were doing their job. Yeah. They were tracking this person. They were trying to give a heads up to the higher command. They clearly were trying to plug the holes in the perimeter. They had good situational awareness. And it was the communications breakdown, obviously the failure itself from Secret Service, that allowed something like this to happen. And clearly, I mean, and the other problem is too, it's raising a lot of conspiracy theories, maybe even legitimate ones, who are like, okay, seriously? Like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
How is this even allowed to happen? Was this an inside job? Like, at a certain point, you have to ask like crazy questions where, are they just obtuse and not learning the information at all? Did a radio call never go out? Was there really not a single comm check between the local police and others? Especially if he tells them, call it into the higher command. They were doing everything that they were supposed to do, remaining aware, seeing where people were, notifying their higher ups and each other. It seems that the counter snipers themselves didn't even know about it, and the Secret Service agents ultimately allowing Trump to go out onto the stage. Remember, he's only shot some 5 minutes after he goes out there, so they should never have let him out on the stage in the first place.
No doubt about it. Yeah. No doubt about it. And I mean, part of what is so revealing here is the fact that they had eyes on this guy and knew there was a problem an hour and a half before Trump takes the stage. And yet they know, hey, we saw him with a rangefinder. Hey, I lost sight of him. And still nothing is done. Still Trump is allowed to take the stage. And the Secret Service detail that were on him were claiming like, we didn't have access to any of those communications. We had no idea. So what the hell is going on here? And when you read the TikTok of this, it really is astonishing because don't forget, so apparently Crooks went the day before to scope out the rally site and was able to walk around and take a look around. Then he was able to fly his drone over the rally site while law enforcement is there setting up and setting the perimeter and getting everything ready. How the hell does that happen? Then after he flies his drone around, that's when he finishes and sits at the picnic table. That's when he's spotted by this counter sniper. He then walks to his car, left the drone inside the car, and was then just hanging around the warehouse complex. So you have this guy who flew a drone, who's lurking around with a rangefinder, who's identified and photographed. One of those photographs is one that circulated immediately afterwards. And we had no idea that it was actually taken by law enforcement that day prior to the shooting. And all of this happens, and you get even to the point where he's on the roof and you have local regular citizens yelling at the Secret Service, yelling at law enforcement. There is a guy on the roof with a gun, and this still goes forward. So, seeing the TikTok of all these text messages and the manifest multi-layered failures is quite astonishing. Another thing we just learned is that, these local police departments, they were struggling to fill the request for the manpower the Secret Service was asking for. People had different obligations. This is not a large urban, I actually know this part of the country pretty well. And this is not a large urban area. So they don't have, a massive manpower and massive police force. So if your Secret Service and your local partners are not able to fill all the roles, then that's on you to make sure that everything is secure, and that the manpower needed is provided. So I agree with you that while there may have also been local law enforcement failures, ultimately the buck stops with the Secret Service. Like, this is your job, this is your duty, and clearly there was a massive failure here.
Yeah, even more on the TikTok of the day is super interesting. Like, it seems that the morning of, he goes to Home Depot, buys a ladder, so he has enough situational awareness of the site to know that he needs a ladder to get up there. He arrives, he apparently stays in his car, flies his drone, gets out, begins attracting attention now 1 hour before. The first photo of him is taken at 5:14 p.m. So that's exactly an hour before the shooting. Now people are like, hey, this guy knows where we are. He's acting sketchy. He knows where we're going. Then you start like, hey, this dude saw him with a rangefinder. I mean, basically at every single time, like all the way up till 5:38, there were probably 3 or 4 separate opportunities that he could have been stopped, both from the drone the day before. You also see that the Secret Service itself was aware of some serious issues in staffing. That's what you're referencing, about how they had difficulty getting enough police officers to volunteer, to take over the site. I mean, the real question too is about how some of his other past activity was never flagged or by law enforcement of any kind. Let's put this up there on the screen. What they show here is that the Trump shooter began, quote, buying guns and bomb materials more than a year ago. Now, this is part of why I get so frustrated whenever they always talk about needing more resources afterwards. Was it not, some 30 years ago now almost, that they blew up the Oklahoma City courthouse with fertilizer? And lo and behold, that's the type of stuff that he's ordering online. Like, allegedly, that was supposed to trip some signs and actually get people to come and to visit and to pay attention. But he apparently was able to search online pretty repeatedly. Listen to this. For information about power plants, mass shooting events, improvised explosive devices. He then researched that May assassination attempt on the Slovakian prime minister and apparently had been Googling, quote, major depressive episode. I mean, all of these look obvious in retrospect, but the big flag to me is the more than a year ago buying bomb-making materials. Because according to the FBI and others, they're supposed to be super adept at, piecing all of these things together, going back some 30 years. Clearly, I mean, it's a huge fail, and it's obvious that their own security dragnet that they purport to be very effective and all of that, they're not even good at policing it. So the more that you learn about this entire thing, you see all of the things come together. You see the text messages reveal the incompetence, but I still think that there is significant more questions here about whether the Secret Service itself actually knew of the gunman some minutes before, and if the call was made by the Trump detail to allow him to step onto the stage. Because we have a photo of the gunman exactly almost 1 hour, 58 minutes or whatever before the shooting. That is just a simply unforgivable thing that they allowed him to do.
To me, almost the craziest thing is the drone.
Yeah, I mean,
I would never in a million years think that on the day of, hours before a rally, you could just casually fly a drone scoping out the rally site and that this would be fine and no one would even notice.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me. And I'm sure for anyone else who is out there with malicious intent, they are clocking very closely how many failures there were. I mean, thank God this was just some, 20-year-old who was sort of freelancing it. If this was a trained professional, we all know what the result would have been. And we came within an inch of that result occurring anyway. It's interesting what you say about the online searches, because we have given up in this country so much of our civil liberties, both to the government and to these large tech companies. And it's like, all right, if you're going to be spying on our every search, like, can you at least do some good with it? Like, can you at least identify the dude who's buying an AR-15 and stocking up on bullets? It was his dad's AR-15, let me be fair.
Well, he did purchase it from him, so,
did he?
Yeah, there's a record of that.
Stocking up on bullets, stocking up on fertilizer. Now, his parents were interviewed, and they said that he'd always been, quote, interested in science and experiments. So all this like chemicals and gun equipment that he's stockpiling, they were like, oh, this is fine, which there are questions there as well about what's exactly is going on. But yeah, it's like, okay, well, if we're going to be spied on every second of the day, the very least you could do is use that information in some sort of a useful manner here. But that obviously did not happen. And, I don't doubt that it's difficult this is a classic lone wolf. As far as we can tell, there really was no ideological motivation outside of just creating mayhem, chaos, and horror. Like, that seems to have been his whole goal based on the searches, was to find the most high-profile person target he possibly could. And it just so happened that Trump was holding this rally very close to his home, and so it was, in a sense, this like crime of opportunity. And if you can imagine, if it had been Joe Biden or another person there, given the searches that he was engaged in, it may have been a different political figure that he ends up targeting. So I don't doubt that it's difficult to track these people in advance. But when the dude is there flying a drone on the day of, and then you spot him with a rangefinder, and then you spot him behaving suspiciously, and when you try to track him down, he grabs a backpack and runs away from you, that seems like, a pretty significant sign, just as a layperson, that there's something bad that's about to happen here.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of those where don't let the whole like, oh, well, you weren't there, you weren't a professional. It's like, no, I think we all know. And at a certain point, we are the people who pay for all of this. Do you have any idea? I mean, the Secret Service budget and protection and all that is technically secret, but it costs probably, I would say, in the range of a couple $100 million a year in terms of securing the president. What are we paying for? All of this nonsense so that they can fly the beast, all the way to China 24 hours before the president lands for this great big security perimeter. And it's like, then the former president, active Republican candidate, is on the stage, and we're not pulling him when we know the most glaring and obvious things that happen right here in our own country, couple 100 miles away from Washington, D.C. The whole thing is just absolute nonsense, the way that it happened. So still lots of questions to be had here, especially from the agent and the agent in charge of the detail itself, whether he had any info. If he did, I mean, just imagine.
To me, the most legitimate, like, quote unquote, conspiracy theory, Ryan used this term, malicious incompetence.
Yeah.
Where it's like, it wasn't an inside job, or, he wasn't a recruited asset. He doesn't seem like a particularly likely candidate to have been a recruited asset. But was there just a sense of like, we don't really care? We don't really care what happens at this rally. We aren't really that interested in protecting this particular individual. That, I would say, is an extremely legitimate and very open question at this point.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.